Hey Tim, welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mate, I know we're going to get to talking around your company, Shield GEO, but just for the listeners, maybe I could get you to just give us a little bit of your background and kind of what led you to kind of getting into business.
Sure. So Shield GEO, the company that we sold, is an employer record service. So at the time that we sold, we had about 70 employees in something like 35 countries, give or take, and we were supporting hundreds of clients. I think we had 900 odd supported employees across sort of 50, 55 countries. So employer record, we're a third-party employer where companies wanted to hire somebody in a country, but they didn't have their own entity and they couldn't do it directly. Then they could use us. The business has been going for about 7 years, and I founded it along with a guy, Duncan McIntosh, who I have known for a long time, and this is, I think, the third business that we've had together.
Yeah, cool. And did you come from a background in kind of this outsourcing staffing world, or was it new?
Yeah, it was sort of connected. So Duncan and I have another business, Contractor Taxation, which in fact we still have, and so we were running that before Shield, and then sort of that's more B2C, I guess. You know, individual contractors coming to us. And then we started to see an opportunity to become more B2B. And we initially tried to grow that service line from within our business, and it just didn't really fit. So we created a new service line, and then it rapidly spun out into Shield. And then, you know, once we saw the potential of it, then we started to just devote all of our time basically to Shield.
Yeah, cool. I'm curious, you know, I'm always interested in what drives people to get into business. You know, and I've interviewed a lot of different people, and I hear some really kind of interesting stories. Everything from I was kind of just working for someone doing this stuff, and just decided to do it myself, and other people with these really interesting entrepreneurial families and whatever else. I'm just sort of curious, like, you've run now multiple businesses. What do you think it was that led you to going down that path versus just the employee path?
I'm not a good employee, and so I struggled to get a job coming out of university, and I started work as a recruiter. It was the only job I could get, and in fact, I got that job because I was interviewing for a job, and the recruiter stopped the interview and said, I remember he said, "Where do you want to see yourself in 5 years?" And I went, "I got no idea," and he stopped. He said, "Look, this interview's over. You're not going to get this job. Never say that again." And then, you know, we got to talking, and he explained what he did, and I said, "Well, that doesn't sound so hard." And so I ended up not working with them, but I went into that area. And then over the years, I guess I always had sort of curiosity about how businesses were run and what they were into. I was always going to my bosses for the few years that I was working for people and saying, like, you know, what about this? Have you thought about doing that? What about this other thing? And then in the end, and I was working mostly in sales, so I was pretty accustomed to risk and pretty accustomed to working, you know, very low base, high commission percentage. I felt very confident of my ability to generate income and support myself. And I remember going to my boss at one stage and saying, "Here's a business opportunity that I can see within your business. Do you want to do it?" And he said no, and I pestered him for a while, and he said no. And then I said, "Look, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it." Thinking, like, you know, it's like a threat, like, come on, finally. And he went, "No, I'm not going to do it." And I went, "I guess that means I've got to do it then." So yeah, that sort of spun me out. And so it was, you know, one of those warm landing positions where I sort of tapered down my work for him and started my own thing on the side. And that was it. From then on, that was sort of early 2000s. From then on, I've been in my business, except for a brief period when I came back to Australia and got married, and my income wasn't enough to support our plan. So I had to go get a job. I think I lasted 18 months at that one before they spat me out again. So
Yeah, it's that's a very common theme with the guests on this show. I've had a few guys who've sold their companies and girls, and then part of the deal they've gone, listen, like to the buyers, you're saying you want me for around for all these years, but let me tell you, you really don't. Like I'm not a great employee. I'm expensive, and I really don't do the work that you're buying. The stuff you want is done by them. So, it's and I think to trying to cage people who are fundamentally entrepreneurial, I mean, it just doesn't work, right? They're going to want to rush off and do new things, and scratch that itch. I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think also, particularly if you've had experiences in the sort of mainstream workplace which weren't always great, and I think we all have. And that was a big motivator. Duncan and I talked about that a lot when we were starting Shield, and we realized that it was going to grow to more people. And so one of our initial conversations, or one of the things we talked about a lot was, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're growing up and you're like, I'm never going to parent like that. And the way they do, I'm going to let my kids watch TV and, like all the things you don't like, they're the things you sort of think you're going to frame around it. And so that was a big part of our motivation. And so when you build a company like that, when you build it around what you want and what you don't want, and sort of avoiding the things that you think aren't good, it's very difficult to then imagine yourself going into a situation again where you don't have that, because it's pretty good when you get it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think, to simplify, I think you're talking about culture here, right? Like, the kind of the way we do things around here. And I'm curious because you've obviously grown, particularly Shield, to a different kind of size. I've found in my experience, both working for other people as well as my own company, where you have these kind of ideals around culture and the way you want to do things, but it can get a little bit harder as your businesses start to grow and you start to get more people and you need more structure and processes and, all that sort of stuff. Did you ever find yourself going along that journey and starting to go, well, hang on, like, geez, we've always kind of done it this way because that's kind of culturally how we love to do things, but we're finding, where that size is putting pressure on you to maybe change that culture or to have to implement things that you didn't think you would have to?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and actually, I think my view on it has changed a lot with time. So at the time when you're a startup, handful of people and everywhere you look, there's stuff that's on fire. Those sort of disconnections are really painful because you're like, this is one thing we thought we could take for granted, and and there's so much else that we need to address. And particularly because Duncan and I had a very long-standing and strong sort of work relationship and friendship. Even when we had conflict, it's inevitable that you're going to have conflict and tension. We had that to sort of fall back on, which was really helpful. When we brought more people into the business, then, for some of them, they didn't innately sort of get it. And I think also we weren't very explicit about it early on. And we moved at about 20, 25 people to, we had a couple of false starts, and then we managed to articulate our values and embed them. And probably that 25, 30 people, we did a lot of work from then on, and it was really, really powerful. I remember before that reading people going on about values alignment and blah, 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 and thinking it all sounds a little bit, too much to me. But the change that it made in our business and the power that it gave us, the sort of strength it gave us was unbelievable. And so as we navigated those things, we realized there were only 4 things we cared about, and that was our values. If it was important enough for us, we had to articulate it in our values. Everything else was up for grabs. So, if you want to be an introvert or an extrovert, if you want to be, different types of personalities or different behaviors or backgrounds or all those things, we really encourage that, and we can benefit from that diversity. As long as we have those 4 things in common, then that becomes the sort of fabric that binds us all together through thick and thin.
Yeah, I think that's a really great insight. It's, I think you do end up boiling down to a few things that you care most about, right? It's and after that, just kind of get out of people's way and let them do things, right?
Yeah. Well, and it means that, for example, when I remember one of the challenging times. I think probably everybody who owns a business experienced something similar when, last year around sort of March, April, May, when COVID was flaring up, and I was terrified. At a personal level, scared. At a business level, really worried, and we were trying to work out, what would happen. What are we going to be able to stay in business? Are we going to have to, make people redundant, all that sort of stuff, and one of our values is be human, sort of empathy. And so I was able to call on that. As a leader, being uncertain about what's happening, I was able to say to the group, look, everybody here has empathy. It's something that we filter for when you come in. It's something we encourage. And now is the time that we can utilize that. Let's support each other. And knowing what your strengths are and what you can tap into, particularly in those challenging moments, was, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and I'd even say, understanding your weaknesses too, so you know when to go. Do you know what? Geez, I'm faced with this situation at the moment, and I know I don't usually handle this very well, and I'm willing to be vulnerable enough to say I actually might need some help here, or can I lean on you guys a little bit because I don't know how to handle those situations? I think that's as equally as important as knowing your strengths and how to play to it.
Yeah, actually, so two thoughts come to mind. One is I think we're probably a bit overly vulnerable in our organisation. So, you have to be a little bit careful, I think, particularly as an owner or as a leader, in that people don't exist as it's not like free therapy, and I think my friend Jennifer Kim has a saying, I'll get it wrong, but she's like, a lot of early startups is founders working out their unresolved trauma on their employees, and that resonates a lot. If you've got anger issues, or if you can't take conflict, or if you're afraid to make difficult decisions, or you're worried about finances or whatever, then the whole organization can be impacted by that. And but then I think the other aspect of it is that giving people, I think, the opportunity to sort of express themselves within that context is really powerful. And that's one of the things that I think I've really benefited from particularly as an owner. I think as a leader you get this opportunity, but particularly as an owner, there's so much opportunity for growth. So much opportunity, so many instances where you're going to get tested, and you have to rise to the challenge. You find out what you're made of and what's important to you. And it's a wonderful opportunity if you feel it that way.
Yeah, and you're willing to embrace it. Yeah. You mentioned the word conflict before, and I'm like to sort of explore that a little bit, because it's, to me, I think conflict, certainly healthy conflict, is usually a great catalyst for change and all this sort of stuff as well. But it's not something we should avoid in our lives, but it's like anything. I think it's not what you do, it's how you do it. But when you say conflict, I'm always interested, because if we go back to the beginning, your business partner Duncan, you said he was a good mate before you, and so you came into this as friends, and then you got into business together. And so if we can explore that a little bit, because I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly with this stuff. I've seen great mates torn apart. I've seen great mates, whose entire business world could have fallen apart, but it didn't, because of their friendship that kind of helped them navigate. And did it concern you going into business with a friend?
Not at all. No, not going in. So we'd had a business, two businesses actually before, and I figure if you're going to go through difficulty, why not be with someone who you like?
Yeah, indeed.
And I think of those sort of stories you told, there were times where I think it helped me. I don't want to talk for him, but it helped me knowing that I valued the friendship very strongly, and so I was prepared to make the work. There were times I was prepared to make concessions. There were times I was prepared to step back. Not, I'm pretty stubborn, not all the time, but maybe not often. But knowing that there's sort of that there's a bigger picture, and that there's things that are more important, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. I've certainly been in some business ventures with some friends in the past, and not necessarily major, as in like I'm all in and my house is on the line. That sort of pressure can certainly change dynamics as well. But I think I've certainly always had discussions with mates when we've done stuff that, hey, our friendship comes first here, and if we find ourselves in a position where we feel like that's being compromised, let's all agree to stop and completely reassess. Having said all that, can I ask, did you guys have a discussion around, did you have any sort of shareholders agreement or anything like that talked about how you would manage conflict?
We eventually put a shareholders agreement in after we'd been running the business for like 3 years. And bearing in mind, we'd been in business together for a long time before that. But otherwise, it was always just equally split, right? So it was 50-50 in terms of ownership. Contracted taxation was the same. So that means we have to find a resolution, which I think is better. And that's, I think, one of the difficulties that we have as human beings, and particularly in business, is we want things to be easy. And to an extent, it's necessary. You want your business to be easy and simple. But that doesn't help when we're facing complicated situations, and particularly conflict. And one of the difficulties there is, can we sort of stand in the middle of conflict, and can we understand that you can be right and they can be right at the same time? And so that was a big learning for us. Was Duncan was driving sales and I was driving operations. And there was a period in our business where I was like, this guy is just making my life hell. Like, is he doing it deliberately? It's just killing me with this stuff. Keeps agreeing to stuff with customers. I don't want to fulfill it. It's a nightmare. And then, we talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And eventually, and a lot of it was that situation where, you're sort of at loggerheads, and then one person gives a little bit of ground, and then everybody tries to give so much ground, and then it all untangles. And eventually we came to the understanding that, like, sales and operations were just like, they were pulling in different directions. Like, there's always going to be tension between those functions, because operations wants it to be easy and consistent, and sales wants to make as much money as they can. They want to hit the revenue targets. And once we started to view it that way, it helped us, and it really helped the organization below, because, then we just started to say, look, there's going to be difficulty here. We're going to be in situations which are going to be difficult, and everyone's going to have to give a little bit and understand what's happening at the other, for the other people involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. Out of interest, did you guys, before I get to that point, it just, I guess, confirming what you said there. I mean, you talked about the shareholders agreement after about 3 years. I find that's actually quite common. I mean, I think most people start a business and they go, well, it's nothing at the moment. It's worth nothing. Like, we're having a go at something. It's an idea. And so I think the idea of shareholders agreements and stuff start to come in when the business starts to actually do something. And people go, actually, wow, there's an asset here, and oh, wow, that's growing, and we're going to have more complexity going forward. So therefore, and I think sometimes this is even more of a human element rather than this, wise business guy. I think human nature is, as things get more complex, we try to find ways to simplify it and to control it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the shareholders agreement often comes into play. But anyway, yeah. Look, I completely understand where you're coming from.
Well, and also things like what happens if I get sick? What happens if I want to get out? When it's nothing, it doesn't matter. Like, I want to get out. We're not doing anything anyway. I can leave. But when you've got like 10 people and and it's pulling in a couple $100,000 a month or whatever, like, at that point, you're thinking, well, if I got sick, I'm relying on this income now. Like, how's that going to work? And so I think having clarity around those sort of things is really helpful. But to your point, at the beginning, I see a lot of people where they're like, they want to do a 60-40 split, and I want 65-35 or whatever. And at that time, you can just waste a lot of energy and also kill a lot of the engagement and momentum and vibe. If you spend too much time squabbling over stuff that may or may not actually end up being worth something. there's probably like a nice tipping point where things should be a bit more grown up.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I think if you've got the sort of foresight to have at least an early discussion go with your potential partners and say, hey, listen, at some point, if this thing takes off, we're going to need to probably put more structure around this. And why don't we just agree that like we're all going to go out there and do our very best. And if we get to $1 million in revenue, that we probably should use that as a line in the sand to say, well, let's sit down and assess where we're at and where we're going. And at least we've all agreed that there's a checkpoint. Let's check in with each other, And
yeah.
I think like anything, probably communication here is actually, there's no right or wrong way of doing it, but as long as you're communicating with each other, you're probably going to turn out okay.
Well, and that's a really great point is, instead of spending time at the beginning thinking about shareholder agreements and what happens if the worst happens, talking about values, communication, working styles is something that people don't, I think, do enough. And, knowing that, hey, if I'm under stress, I'm going to go quiet, or if I'm really upset, I'm going to flush red, and you're going to see explaining those sort of things to people means that you're setting yourself up so much better to have success and to navigate the inevitable bumps in the road.
Yeah, and I like that. They are inevitable bumps. Wouldn't it be nice if business was a straight line, right? As well, between points A and B. But it never does happen. Out of interest, I mean, did you guys have any? Was there any discussion in the early days around where you thought this business might go? Like, was there the fabled exit plan discussion? Hey, we think we can build this and sell it, or just was it we've got a bit of an idea, let's have a crack?
So I'm very much not a planner, and one of the reasons why I'm not a planner is because I hate failing at things, and also like my plans just never ever come to fruition. But on this one point, when we were incorporating the company and opening the bank accounts, we did it in Hong Kong, and so Duncan and I were in I can't remember the name of it, but there's a Yum Cha restaurant. It's down by the harbour. We're sitting in this beautiful dining room looking out over Hong Kong harbour, food coming on the trolleys, and we wrote down on a napkin, 1,000 employees, this much per month per employee, this is the number, that's what it would mean. Okay, if we can get to that point, we're really happy. And
we've made it.
and actually... And we thought it would happen in I can't remember how long, 7 years I think we said it was going to happen. 5 years, 7 years, I can't remember. We just got to just add this many employees a month, and if it compounds, blah, 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 we'll get there. And we actually ended up getting, we sort of outperformed that financially, but we got about, we're getting close to that number in terms of the number of employees we were supporting. And that's just wild to me that top of the, just off the cuff, just writing it down, it actually ended up coming somewhat to fruition. But it was a good exercise because it did give us, it was a fantastic feeling as we started to close in on it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, I've done plenty of those back of the napkin plans, and I think I've had plenty of them that don't survive the first day of business. But that's awesome that you managed to achieve that. I mean, I think there's having the bravery, I think, to go into business for yourself and take on risk, and I think it's really facing uncertainty. That's actually the brave part is not knowing how things are going to land and being willing to do it anyway. But I also know that feeling of, wow, we're actually making traction here, and it's it's a wonderfully exciting feeling to make that kind of progress and feel like you're moving somewhere. So
for sure. And I should point out, also, we thought we were going to create that thing basically just with the two of us. We didn't think we needed anyone else, and we ended up with 70 employees. So numbers weren't all accurate. But I think that something that was always very, very motivating for me was that sense of self-sufficiency. Just being in a micro business, just like one person or two people, you have that wonderful sense of being reliant on yourself, and that's a terrific feeling. And then, as our business grew and we brought more people into it, the feeling of providing people with a livelihood and a good job, that's a really, that's an amazing feeling if you're lucky enough to be in that position.
Yeah. Did you ever have the experience of, um, I don't know about you, but I've certainly found myself, I've go to, you hire somebody and then you think, okay, well, I've got to hand over this task. And in some ways, in certain situations, I've struggled to let go because I keep thinking, well, hang on, I can do this or I could do it a bit better, or I keep feeling like I've got to put my view on it, but then eventually letting it go and realizing that person does it better than I do.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's letting go of your Legos. There's a whole, Silicon Valley sort of, tech meme about it. Yeah, I had that feeling, particularly on the operations side. In the beginning it was just me, and every job that I did, I got to a point of being semi-competent. But and then we'd hire someone who actually it was their job, and all of a sudden it started to go better. And even actually, it's not just me, because Duncan was doing sales, and then when we hired a salesperson, sales went through the roof, and so it looks like he wasn't doing such a great job either. But it's a very weird feeling, because on the one hand, you're doing something, and you generally, like, you're learning it as you go, and then you go, oh, okay, I can do this a little bit, and it starts to help the business. So you think, oh, maybe it's not going so badly, and then just when you start getting comfortable, you got to give it up and then go and suck at something else, only in order to get semi-decent at that and then get fired again.
Yeah, totally. I guess if you get the opportunity to fire yourself on various jobs, though, you're probably doing all right. So
yeah, but it's weird because some of those jobs are, some of them you're happy to get rid of and you can't wait, and then there's others of them actually that you really quite enjoy, and also, going back to that idea of sort of simplicity or comfort. It can be nice sometimes to just, you hit the bar and the pellet comes out and you get the pellet. And when you're doing a job that you've been doing for ages, that's what it's like. And yet, particularly in that sort of founder startup environment, there's always a new job. So so you rarely get that comfort. And particularly as you start to move from individual contributor to manager and then manager of managers, that experience of hitting the bar and getting the pellet goes away, because you're not, like, the stuff that you're doing doesn't have any sort of immediate reward. It might pay off months or years later. It's a very big adjustment. Yeah,
it is, and we're all different personality types, of course, and it's not everybody makes that transition very well. And I've had numerous clients who have come to us to talk about succession planning, because I'm thinking of one chap in particular at the moment who they're in the sort of audio visual world, and he said, mate, he goes, I need to hire a CEO. He goes, I'm not a CEO. I don't want to do all this management stuff. He goes, I'm a nerd. I want to play with my equipment and kind of nerd out with my clients and have some fun. Like, he goes, that's me. That's, and one thing I'll say about that client was it was fabulous just to, I guess he's making himself vulnerable there and admitting that he doesn't have strength to do the job he was in. But, just also having the emotional intelligence to say, you know what, like, I'm not good at that. There's other people who could do that much better. I'm just going to go back over here and actually go back to what I was doing. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. I love meeting people like that, because they're usually quite interesting, as well as being good at what they do.
Yeah, and I guess it comes back to that idea of being tested. You are gonna get tested in those capacities, and it doesn't mean you have to succeed.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that is a very interesting point, because our mutual friend Gina is like 1,000 times the manager and people leader that I am, and yet that was something that I dearly held on to and I really enjoyed doing. Not that I was necessarily that good at it, but I found it very rewarding for myself. And so sometimes that's bittersweet, where you give it up, you see it being done heaps better, which
Yeah.
is like getting a bad performance review. But it's better for the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is a joy still though, isn't there? Like, when you see somebody really not just doing it better than you, but they're enjoying themselves and that's why they're probably better at it because they probably enjoy it more than you do. But I actually get a lot of enjoyment out of that. I love seeing people fulfilling their purpose and being really good at what they do. And I think, and if that makes them a lot better than me as well, wow, like what a win, right? I mean, I certainly don't feel like I need to be the expert at everything. I just, we've got people in our team who are already doing this, right? Who I go, wow, you are so much better at that than I was, and lovely to see it and experience it almost through their shoes too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think where it gets most difficult is where where there are times where you're not ready to give it up for whatever reason. And I'm thinking particularly
Yeah.
around there's things around the direction of the business, around strategy, around culture where we didn't have a lot of this, but it sort of came a bit at the edges, and I've seen it happen to other people where they're getting pushed to shift on those things before they're ready, and as an owner, that's a pretty big schism.
Yeah, look, indeed, and that's probably a good segue. I mean, it is something that business owners a lot really struggle with that when they're going through some form of exit. And I think it's yeah. I mean, look, you see a big range of reactions to that kind of scenario. Can I ask you? So how far into the business were you when you had your first sort of discussion, I guess, with you and Duncan about potentially selling the business?
I mean, we talked about it very, very early on, but just, like at some point, like we could do this, we could sell it. And then it was sort of heads down for maybe 4 or 5 years. And we never went out into the market really. We every now and then, we'd get together and talk about like what it might end up, who would ever be potentially interested in buying it, what's it going to look like in 5 years or 10 years? Do we want to do this forever? But generally, it was about that. Like, how much longer do we think we can keep going? And if we don't want to keep going, what's the alternative? What can we do about that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and so sometimes that was in those periods where you're like, I just can't take another day of this. I just want to get out. And other times, I think it was probably more in that sort of positive, like, the market seems to be going really well, and where do we think it might place us? But it didn't seriously happen until Ben, the Velocity Global CEO, who ended up buying us, until he sort of escalated those discussions.
Yeah. Now, out of interest, you knew Ben before he made an approach on the business. Is that right?
Yeah, so before he even founded his business, we had some business interaction in our old business with him, and then he left that business and then sat out for a period of time until he set up his own business. And so we were chatting to him during that time. We helped a little bit in terms of helping him meet some partners, and we did a bit of sharing of information back in those days when he set up. So there was always a sort of a friendliness there, and then we chatted on and off, particularly he and Duncan, more than he and I. But we chatted on and off over the years. It's a pretty lonely deal and a pretty small industry, so it's nice to have sort of friendly competitors.
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. And the right kind of competitors I've always found are the ones who don't feel like they need to aggressively compete against you. They kind of believe that the world's a pretty large, abundant place, and we can actually be friendly and we can actually engage on very, very civil terms and be nice with each other, enjoy each other's company. So, yeah, it's I think to have that is certainly a privilege. Can I ask, when it came to sort of selling discussions or buying, I guess from Ben's perspective, did you guys approach him? Did he approach you? How did that sort of all come about?
Oh, he approached us. So he'd talked about various ways that we might be able to sort of partner, or I think even merge at one point, and it just never sort of made sense to us. We were doing fine. The market was carrying us along well. We were growing nicely. We didn't really see any benefit, and so that happened. I don't know, every 6 to 12 months, I guess, for a couple of years. And then last year, at the beginning of sort of around that COVID time, very, very cleverly, I think they sort of reached out and went, "Hey, you guys, would you guys be interested in selling, and what might interest you?" And I think, the combination of the uncertainty around what was happening, and Duncan was always a bit more open to the idea of selling than I was.
Mm-hmm.
We said, look, let's just talk to him and just at least see what's out there. It would be nice to know what's out there.
Yep.
And then we just sort of organically worked our way from there. We had some discussions. It was pretty clear that what we wanted, they weren't able to do at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it went quiet, and then they came back towards the end of last year and said, "Hey, you guys said you wanted this. We can do it now. So let's start talking again." And so then they had some private equity involved, so they had some funding coming in. They were on an acquisition spree, and and then the timing sort of lined up.
Yeah, right place, right time. When you came up with your number, without getting into the nitty gritty, did you how did you come up with your number? Did you just use a simple formula? Did you think about all your years? Was there a kind of general? Can you give us some insight into how you came up with your number?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's impossible to start with, but so we looked at what's our turnover, what's our profitability, what sort of multiples do we think are possible. Our area had started to get a lot more attention. A couple of venture capital firms had come in and backed startups. Private equity was sniffing around. So we got a lot of opportunities to chat to them and get a sense for what they, that sort of gives you, they start talking about things like, if you get to this and this number, then we would generally look to invest at this sort of rate and this sort of multiple and so on. And
so when you say that, just to won't go, pick it apart too hard here, but I just, when you say this, get to this and get to that. So in my experience, and please tell me if you're talking about something different here, but in my experience, I've seen investors say, there might be thresholds like, we want you to get to at least 10 mil turnover or 5 mil turnover, or we want you to be at 1 million EBITDA or stuff. Is that the kind of thresholds and stuff you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And so there were things around, we use slightly different terminology than they would, but and in our business, because we're processing payroll, turnover is just a vanity metric. By the end we were doing almost $100 million in turnover. I think over, but we're seeing very little of it because it's just going to the salaries of the people we're paying.
It's passed through, yeah.
And then all the employers, social security, and all that stuff as well. But then there was gross profit, which was effectively how much we were charging. And so I think they wanted that number. The private equity firms wanted that number to get to 10 mil.
Yeah. And so just to help me understanding this space, and for those who maybe aren't as familiar with outsourcing as well, won't go into exact percentages, but typically I would imagine gross profit in a company like this is fairly low because you're charging a higher amount of money for people's salaries. You pay those salaries, which is going to be the bulk of those payments, leaving a slimmer gross margin. Is that kind of a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very much an industry in flux from that perspective because there's companies that charge a percentage, and so they might charge 10, 15, 20% of whatever the employer's cost is. We always charged a fixed margin, although to be honest it worked out to be not that dissimilar from charging a percentage. And then as the VC backed firms came in, then they started to compete very aggressively on price, and their pricing models just don't make any sense to me. Yeah. So I don't know how sustainable they are. I guess it all depends on market share. But and so this was sort of before, I guess, we were talking private equity firms before that sort of influence had really come in. But they're just in general, they were saying, 10 million turnover, EBITDA of about $1 million, I think it was about $1 million, and then they wanted to see certain sort of growth projections, and on that basis, they would give a multiple of something like 7 to 10, I think.
Yep. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's nice. That I know plenty of industries that would jump through a few hoops for a 7 to 10 multiple. So,
well, we were very lucky to be in a space that, when we started the business, there were maybe 4 or 5 companies of any size doing what we're doing globally. And, now there's, I don't know, 20, 25 or something. But we were there pretty early on. And so we're quite lucky to sort of get carried along by that. I think we did good work, but the market was exploding. And then with COVID and the increase in remote work, and now all the interest in work from anywhere, like it was just a good space to be in.
Beautiful timing, yeah. And I think to be an early mover in that market, just it does give you a significant advantage. It's, private equity, these sort of larger investors that come in are looking usually for a platform investment, like, hey, we're going to move into this space. Let's find the one company that we will build upon. And so that often makes it quite appealing, and throw that in with the overall timing of what's going on in M&A now and has been for the last year and will be for the next year or so. There's so much money in the economy. There's super low interest rates, lots of money looking for a home, big global shifts in workplaces and social trends happening. Timing right now for deals like this is actually quite wonderful. And so, certainly we are seeing a bit of an uptick in some multiples as well, which I don't think will be there forever. So, ultimately, I guess the message or the lesson out of all this is that, sometimes the timing of the market is even more important than your own timing in your business and where you feel you're at with things.
Yeah, and so that's a really interesting road to go down. If we can pull on that thread for a little bit, one of the things that I noticed as we grew the business was very much around that, the idea that the market has its own sort of designs. And my friend Peldy, who runs Balsamic, he wanted to cap his company at like just him. He just wanted to just be him. And then he grew to like 12 employees. He's like, that's it, 12, that's it. I'm not having any more. And then they got to like 25, and he's like, 25, I hate it, too many people. But okay, we're going to deal with 25. And then over time, he started to talk about it not really being in his hands, but you exist in an ecosystem where your clients have certain needs and requirements, and the market itself will only provide a certain amount of space for you, but you have to fill that space. And then your employees, they're also involved in this. They have their own sort of needs and desires around the sort of company they're going to work in and the size of it. And so it's interesting. That was an interesting way for me to think about it, in that, because we had the similar thing. We didn't want to create a company with a whole lot of people, but over time we just started to accept that we're a services business, we're in a growing market. I think it was coming on to 70% of our growth was from existing customers towards the end. So what can we do? You can't go to customers and say, hey, you like using our service, but that's it. We don't want to. We're not going to go choose someone else. And our customers,
we've hit our mental threshold.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Just because I don't want it. That's it.
Yeah.
But so that was a really interesting way to think about being in the business. That we're trying to find our sort of natural space and then inhabit it. And if you can get into that, then it's almost like that flow state, because you're not trying to grow where growth isn't possible. You're not trying to fight like what the market is sort of dictating. And I think it's a similar thing around selling, and also a similar thing around pricing. So to come back to the question of how do you come up with a price, like, the truism, you're only worth what someone's going to pay for you. We talked about that a lot. The opportunity that was in the market, and we knew that for some companies our valuation was going to be very different for others. So For example, there were a couple of companies that had built out infrastructure that we hadn't. And so our business, if it was transferred onto their infrastructure, would be dramatically more profitable. So they were natural benefactors, and Velocity Global being one of those. And then there were sort of, companies like private equity companies where they were, maybe they're trying to get into a particular space. They're trying to pad out their portfolio or whatever. You might experience greater affinity with those firms than not. To be honest, we didn't do a huge amount with all of them, but that helped us sort of get a sense for what might be possible. And then we started to talk more about, for us it became a pretty simple discussion that we have something that we're pretty happy to keep going. It's hard. It's hard, and then the future is always uncertain. And we were going to come into some new challenges in the market. We had some big things that we needed to accomplish, but we were confident that we could do those. Versus not having to do any of that stuff and getting an exit. Like, it's a very different. It's a very different evaluation, I think, than going. We've got A, B, and C, all of whom are trying to buy us, and we only want to sell. So which one of those are we going to choose?
Yeah. And I think too, having the amount of money being of a size that you don't have to go out the next day and go get a job too, right? I mean, there's got to be a financial element of, well, there is a sense of freedom that comes with this path, and not having to do that work. But that I find it interesting, that strategic lever that you talked about, and I know you and I spoke offline before, but it's you clearly there was an element in Ben's business that when he brought your business in, he could just blow it up and kind of realize some value that you couldn't perhaps capture immediately at the time. I'm curious because not everybody going into a deal can uncover this wonderful point of strategic leverage, and certainly I don't think buyers necessarily advertise it because they don't want to give you ideas that your business is worth more. That level of knowledge, I'm just curious, did you have a greater understanding of that because of your personal relationship with Ben or the fact that you'd known him in the past, or do you think that would have come out in the discussions anyway?
I think we knew because, I mean, I don't think it was so much personal because some of the other sort of leading players had done similar stuff. And we knew that was our pathway. We hadn't really realized how big a mistake it was to not do it. So basically what we're talking about is setting up our own entities in each country instead of using partners. So we were using partners and we would pay those partners. And there's a lot of reasons why we loved using partners. Like, great people, ran really great businesses that really helped us a lot on the way and solved a lot of problems for us, and were just a pleasure to deal with. And so, replacing them just in order to make more money, it was a bit of a bittersweet pill, and also like super hard. If we really wanted to set up like 20 different companies or 35 different companies in different countries, like, we would have been doing it from the beginning, but we were always sort of shying away from it because it's hard, it's risky, it comes with a lot of overhead. But when we started going through the sale process, and we started to, like, one of the things we tried to work out was, what's this worth to them? Because if there is a scenario where someone could have come to us and said, we have this financial goal, and so we're going to do this, this, and this, and part of it would be to get you guys involved, because if we get you guys involved, then we can get a bigger multiple, or we can get this other thing involved, we can get this investor or whatever. They didn't want to do that because they had their own plan, and we were just a bit player in their big play. But we tried to flesh that out, and in doing that, we actually realized, like, if we didn't have to pay these service providers, if all that money was coming in our pocket, our business suddenly looks like this. So that's what we're worth to these guys.
Yeah.
And then that also meant that we used it we could use it as a bargaining chip, because we could go, well, if we don't sell, all we've got to do is this, this, and this, and then we're going to be worth this much more, because that's all you're going to do with us anyway. And then they used it as a reverse bargaining chip, because they said, well, we've done that and we know how painful it is, and I don't think you want to do it. So it's all part of the fun.
It's all part of the dance. That's right. Yeah. Can I be cheeky? Without obviously revealing anything, too confidential. Can you give us a sense of what the business sold for?
So we got into the 7 figures. 7 figures.
7.
Yeah.
So you sub 10 mil or
no,
over 10?
Over 10 mil. Sorry, is that 8 figures?
Okay,
I told you beforehand.
Yeah,
I don't know how many numbers are in the number. So and we got a good multiple. So we outperformed the multiple that we were expecting because of that, because we had a unique value. And I think one of the benefits that we had was because we had that relationship with Ben, because he'd known us for a long time. We'd seen each other operate. We'd, I guess, competed against each other. We had same partners. You hear stories, and also sometimes, when we'd faced difficulties, or when he'd faced difficulties, we'd got together and chatted about it. Like, there's this thing happening in Mexico. How are you guys dealing with it? How are we dealing with it? And so he had a lot of confidence, I think, in terms of the sort of character and quality of the people that were coming on board. And I'd like to think that's carried across, because he certainly seems happy with how it's played out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, you remind me of another guest I had on the show, lovely chap, Pete Martin, who's based in the US, fundamentally, it was a service-based business, ultimately sold to KPMG. But what he did is, how do you get to know personally KPMG? I mean, it's so large, right? But what he did do is, over the years leading up to his exit, he actually cozied up to them. He had a sense that they would make a great acquirer, and so he actually cozied up to them and started doing a lot of projects and work with them. And after a while, it just got to the point, and it sounds like you had a similar thing with Ben, where everybody could see the obvious synergy. And so in the end, it's sort of, by the time they came to having the discussions, it wasn't like he didn't need to convince them of the idea. They all just went, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Well, if you're open to talking, let's talk. And it kind of just evolved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably how it looked more from Ben's side, because I think he always had the vision of bringing like us and multiple companies together. From our side, certainly there was that familiarity, and that's something that over time I got more into. Duncan was always pretty good at this as well, but like basically, we would talk to anyone, and so whenever any of these new people came into the market and they were trying to work out like what they're trying to do, or like I would always chat to them, wish them well, give them a little bit of advice if they wanted it, not trying to give away like the family secrets or whatever. But I think one of the things you said before, like we were in a growing market, and we were also confident that we owned our space. And so not everybody has that opportunity. I think if you're probably like Pizza Hut and Domino's and you're in a fight to the death, maybe there's not space to be sort of friendly there. But within our, we were in a bigger space, and we didn't want to own the whole thing. We were happy to just have our part. And so in that context, like I was pretty happy to talk to anybody, because I didn't think anyone was really going to come and try and take our spot. And, if they did, good luck. I figured we could compete pretty well, because like we knew it.
If it was that easy, they'd already be doing it, right? So
yeah, and that was one of the things that we certainly noticed, was like, particularly like the VC companies, they have such a short timeline and agenda. They have to be dramatically more aggressive, and so they're very. On the one hand, they have great opportunity because they got all this cash, but on the other hand, like they're quite constrained in terms of what they can and can't do, and so I think once you start to pencil all that in, that's when you sort of get the sense that, okay, there is a market, but like that space is only going to be for those sort of companies, and this space is more for these ones, and so on. I always found that quite comforting, having that sense that we had a patch.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. Tim, I could talk to you about this stuff all day. I'm cognizant of time, but I would love to ask you if maybe there's one or two tips that you might share with your sort of fellow entrepreneurs who are maybe a little bit earlier in their journey and not sure if they're going to exit or growth and all that sort of stuff. So, but before I do that, are you happy if people reach out and want to connect and touch bases someday?
Yeah, for sure. I'm about to have a lot of time on my hands, so. I'm always, awesome. But I'm always happy to chat to people. In fact, that was one of the best things I did in the last couple of years was I just tried to chat to as many people as I could, and if anyone ever wanted to talk about something, I would always have a conversation with them, and that really improved my enjoyment of the business and of life in general. So if anyone wants to chat, I'm more than happy to do that. And
no, that's cool. Well, look,
LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. LinkedIn's probably a good place. They're pretty easy to find on there.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, we'll share your LinkedIn, the link to your profile in the show notes for this, so people can access it. Guys, if you reach out to Tim, please maybe just put a little note there that you heard him on the podcast, so he actually has a little bit of context as to maybe why or where you're reaching out from. But Tim, I've really enjoyed chatting to you today. I'm super grateful of you sharing your story with us and just talking through some of this stuff. I know I got a lot out of it, so I'm sure our listeners will as well. Is there one perhaps parting tip or piece of advice you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, I think our sort of exit story is probably a little bit unique. I haven't spoken to a lot of other people who've had that exact sort of experience, where they were sort of 50-50, founders with someone they knew well, sold to somebody they knew pretty well, and all that sort of stuff. So, I feel very charmed in that respect. But the thing I think that two things made the biggest difference for me. One was, in all that agonizing around valuations and everything else, coming to the idea of what's enough for me, and to your point, like, we were able to get to a number where I could say, I can buy a better house if I want to. I'm going to be able to send my kids to the school that they want. I'm not going to have to work again if I don't want to. All of these things that were important to me, I could see a life that I could create that I would be happy based on that. And so that was really important because from that moment on, that was sort of the baseline in terms of where I wanted to get to. And then the other real trigger for me was... Duncan, and he knows me very well. I wavered at one point, and I remember I messaged him and I said, "Look, I think we can get to the same amount or better, and it'll only take us like 3 years. So, what are we doing? Why would we sell? Why don't we keep going? I think I want to keep going." And he said to me, "Well, we could. I agree, we could, or you could do whatever you want for the next 3 years, and take the money now." And that was a very convincing argument. And I think that's one of the things that we forget. We get so caught up in the money and everything else, but time is the thing that you never get back. And particularly, some of what we were talking about before, like the amount of time we get around our families, the amount of time we get for holidays, the amount of time we get with our kids and our partners, and quality time is so ephemeral, just slips through your fingers. So the idea that I was able to exchange our sort of success and so on in order to create time, which is now that's a great way to think about it. And so I think those two things, finding out, thinking about what's going to be enough for you, and then trying to hold that in your head, and then also trying to think about that sort of totality of what it means, because some of those things I think we just sort of take for granted.
Yeah. I think that's just amazing advice, Tim. I think, really, really cuts through. It's, and if you are listening to this and you're not sure how to work out your number, please reach out to us. We've got a really great process we can help you with to help you kind of work out what's a real number for me as an individual. And so, it's an exercise really worth doing. so that, if you do have, somebody like a Ben knock on your door, you kind of know where you're at. And I think it takes some of the emotion out of it, because you're comfortable in not just who you are, but what you want out of any situation. So, Tim, thanks so much again for coming on the show, mate. I really, really enjoyed chatting to you. Really enjoyed your company, and mate, I'm pretty sure we need to catch up for a beer sometime in the new year.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Look forward to it, and thank you very much. It was a great conversation, great questions, and yeah, it was fun. You don't get to talk about this stuff all that often, so I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
My pleasure indeed. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay.